Good afternoon and welcome to the Grassroots Corner. This is our special Easter edition. And so, first of all, to all of our listeners and all of our guests, happy Easter. What I want to do before we get started with our guests is talk a little bit about what this show is about and what you're going to be, the themes you're going to be listening to. The Grassroots Corner is sponsored by the organization I work for, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. The National Committee is a group that is committed to fighting for and defending Social Security and Medicare. We have about 3 million members. Nationally, all of our revenue comes from member contributions and dues, which are at $12 a year. We don't sell any products. We don't get big corporate donations. We depend on the support and effort of our members. Our goal in this show with the Grassroots Corner is to present to you, our listeners, the people who are working and living in our communities doing innovative and cutting-edge organizing as organizers. It is important that we understand what organizing is about and what it is. Organizing is the skill of helping people form a group in order to advocate within the democratic process on issues that impact that group. Organizers assist and guide others in building people power. Organizers are not leaders necessarily. They develop leaders. Organizers help people work together in order to use collective power on behalf of an issue that impacts the people being organized. So the interviews and dialogues you will hear on Grassroots Corner are with people who are organizing others into organizations on or behalf of the interests of the public for a progressive agenda. But the goal is not just to hear from them. We want our listeners to get a sense of how organizing works, and then to take that knowledge and fight for change. We want all of us to take the ideas, strategies, projects, and campaigns you hear about and get involved. We believe this. We know that organizing works. For our issues, we know that the collective power of people using their democratic abilities and assets has in the past and will in the future protect, defend, and preserve Social Security. We know that if we organize enough people, if we get them together to become leaders, activists, catalysts, and workers in our campaigns against the special interests who want to cut or eliminate Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, if we organize effectively, we will prevail. So as you listen to our guests, think about how their skill sets and expertise help you to be part of the national movement that binds us together as activists. Easter is very much a day in which we think about hope and renewal. The people we have with us bring us that spirit today. The campaigns they've been part of, the campaigns they have organized, each and every one of those fights that you'll hear about today have been organized against well-funded special interests. In each case, you never would have thought that they could have carved out these victories. But they know firsthand the business, the art, the talent. I'm talking about the organizers we're talking to. The business, the art, the talent, the science of organizing. And in so doing, they understand what hope is about as we work for social justice. So on Easter Sunday, this Easter Sunday show, we have 3 guests. We're going to lead off with Judy Hertz, who is the executive director of the Midwest Academy. She's had a long and stellar history of organizing, and she is the executive director of the Midwest Academy, which is a really well-respected training organization located in Chicago, but they train people nationally on how to organize. Next, we'll have Mark Grossman from Sacramento, California. He's currently a spokesperson for the Cesar Chavez Foundation from 1975 to 1981. He was press secretary for the United Farm Workers and worked closely with Cesar Chavez, their president, and since then has worked on numerous campaigns impacting farm workers and impacting low-income workers in California. And finally, our third guest this afternoon is Jessica Bartholow, who is a ledge advocate for the Western Center on Law and Poverty, working on hunger issues and poverty issues as one of the most respected lobbyists in Sacramento, day to day, again, with the Western Center for Law and Poverty. So welcome to our Easter show. And Judy, are you there?
Yes, I sure am.
Well, we're really pleased to have you here. Let me tell our guests a little bit about your background. You are you were for a while director of special projects at the Midwest Academy since 1999, and then in 2011 you became the executive director. Your recent clients include the Brady campaign against gun violence, also the Million Mom March, Smoke Free Wisconsin, the Cincinnati Community Policing Partnering Center, the Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Conference, the Jane Addams Senior Caucus, and a variety of other groups. You've worked on housing, you've worked on environmental, you've worked on worker rights issues. You've got a long and great career, and I know that you're doing a great job at the Midwest Academy, and we are very pleased to have you here on our show today. We'd like to lead off with the following question. Judy, Citizens United, billion-dollar presidential campaigns, more special interest lobbyists in D.C. and state capitals than you can throw a stick at. Why does grassroots activism still matter?
Well, grassroots activism matters particularly because of all those things you just named. We are not the people who are ever going to have the money to go dollar for dollar with the Koch brothers, but what we can do is we can talk to regular people and activate people, inform people about the issues, and get people to take action in elections and far beyond elections to shape the issues, to shape the dialogue, and to really own the democracy. Democracy is not about who has the most money. Democracy is about one person, one vote, and that's where grassroots organizing comes in.
And tell us about the Midwest Academy.
So the Midwest Academy is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. We were founded by Heather Booth, Steve Max, progressives out of the 1960s, civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, to take the lessons, to distill the lessons from those movements. What was effective? What worked? What was really strategic? What kind of power analysis do we need? And how can we as grassroots activists, and particularly as progressive grassroots activists, how can we be effective in bringing about social change? And so that was our founding, and that's our current mission. We see ourselves as building and helping to build infrastructure for the progressive movement, whether that means training, and we do a lot of training on several levels in the skills of organizing, consulting, helping organizations be strategic, build power, build strong organizations. So that's our mission.
You mentioned Heather Booth. Heather was the first guest I had on this program back when we started last summer, and she's very much a good friend and a mentor to many of us.
Yes, Heather is a force of nature.
So tell us, just give us your definition of organizing.
Well, we say that organizing is when the people who are experiencing a problem come together with their family, friends, neighbors, supporters, and allies to talk about what the problem is, identify solutions that they would like to see, and then organize powerful organizations to go out and fight for those common solutions. So people looking at common problems and using the principles of democracy to go out and fight for change.
And so what does an organizer do day to day?
You know, it varies because the term organizer covers such a wide range of people. So an organizer might be working in a neighborhood or a city. That person is probably going to spend a bunch of time either going door to door talking to people or networking through congregations and through other organizations, talking to people, identifying common problems, bringing people together around common problems, helping people think about solutions, and helping people analyze power. What is it that they're up against? Organizing comes in when there's some force pushing back. We can't just think up good ideas and write papers about them and then automatically see them implemented. One of the things that we talk about in our training is being right is not enough. And the organizer is the person who gets people together around problems and helps them do the analysis, figure out the power elements, and build a strategy and bring people together. Organizers, though, also work at the national level, at the state level. So a state or national level organizer is probably spending a lot of time talking to coalition partners, again, doing power analysis, building a strategy, figuring out how, through other organizations, to bring large numbers of people together.
You know, this show is sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and I'm the Grassroots director. I've been there just a little bit over a year. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is organizing seniors. What principles come to mind when you think about organizing seniors? Is organizing seniors different? What does the organizer think about?
You know, organizing seniors is really delightful. Seniors are wonderful people. I think the first principle is to listen to their stories and their wisdom and their knowledge of the world. A lot of times seniors are really at a point in their life where they're ready to take action. They may be retired and don't have a job in the way. They aren't worried about what people are going to think so much anymore, and they are really ready to charge out there and fight, and they're very determined in my experience and can really be a force.
One of the things that I've recognized in the work that I've been doing here and in past campaigns with other organizations is it's very important to the extent possible, to keep the emphasis on an intergenerational basis when working with seniors. Do you agree with that principle?
Yes. I think that the more that we can do that's intergenerational, the better. The more we can bring large numbers of people together, and the more we can bring people together across some kind of, customary boundaries, the better off we are.
Right. You know, back in the mid-'90s, I'll tell you how I got engaged with the Midwest Academy. Back in the mid-'90s, I took a new job with AARP. I was their California advocacy representative there. And one of the things I noticed was that people were jumping towards tactics real quickly without a plan. And a colleague and I who knew Midwest Academy and knew Heather and knew other folks there, including Jackie Kendall, who is also, I believe, on your board of directors.
Yes.
We solicited the Midwest Academy, and for a number of years, they trained hundreds, if not thousands, of AARP volunteers and staff on the basics. So I've known your coursework, and I've taken your week-long course and really grown from it. But I'd like you to do for our listeners, if you could, please, is walk us through a typical training week for the Midwest Academy. What do people learn? What do they do?
Sure, and we do this 5 times a year. It's a 5-day training. People can find our training online at midwestacademy.com. We wrap everything around the principle of thinking strategically. And what I mean by thinking strategically is laying out a plan that involves power analysis and thinking about who is the decision maker that you're trying to get to yes. Are you trying to get a congressman to say yes to something? Are you trying to get a corporation to say yes to something? What kind of power does that person have? What kind of power do you have in relationship to them? And we talk about power being in relation to a specific decision maker. Power is not some abstract concept. When people come to our training, they frequently think that, and these I'm talking about relatively inexperienced organizers, although people come at all levels. Some people have the idea, I'm afraid this is a notion that many people have, that being right is enough, and that if we're right and we just keep saying the same thing over and over again, eventually we'll have to win. And you and I both wish that was true, but it's not. So we talk about how do you analyze? So you're going after an elected official to try to get a particular decision. Well, how much did that person win by in the last election? Who voted for him? Who can you take in to meet with him who he's afraid won't vote for him next time if he doesn't do what he promised or do what the people in his district are asking for? And we all too often see people taking a whole group of people who don't buy the product of a corporation, for example, to meet with the corporation, or you see these massive online petitions, no indication of who those 300,000 people are or why the target of that online petition should particularly care about what those 300,000 people think. So we want to get down into the weeds and analyze what is the decision maker thinking, what are they worried about, and how do we bring the people who will actually have some power to make that person nervous, to make that person rethink their position.
And power is defined in this case as voting power, correct? That's direct constituents.
So if you're talking about an elected official, it's voting power. You've got to take people to meet with an elected official who are actually their constituents, and furthermore are actual constituents who might vote for that person or might have voted for them in the past. We, as progressives, if we take a whole room full of liberals in to meet with a conservative politician, you can take one look at that and think, those people didn't vote for me. They're not going to vote for me no matter what I do, right? And that undercuts our power. So we have to be really serious about analyzing who needs to be in the room, who does that guy need to see in order to take us seriously, and how many of them does he need to see in order to take us seriously. So we may have 50 hardworking, earnest people, but they're banging their heads against brick walls if they don't get, another 1,000 people, 5,000 people, whatever, is needed into the struggle with them in one way or another.
We build
our whole training week around
right.
the principles of thinking strategically and understanding power. We have a very simple tool, the Midwest Academy strategy chart, which lays it all out in a way that really, I think, kind of demystifies it. A good organizer has all these things in their head. We didn't make any of this up. But if you can put it down on paper and reproduce it and get it out of a couple of people's heads, then you can train lots and lots of people to think strategically and to use these tools.
And so the training itself, the week-long training that you're talking about, is both, and it's lecture as well as simulation, as well as people actually being engaged and doing the work right there. Am I correct about that?
Yes. So the training is really fun. We just finished a week of training last week here in Chicago with 35 people from a wide variety of different organizations, wide variety of different skill levels. We typically will lay out some principles about something. There'll be then some kind of exercise. It might be a role play. It might be more of a small group exercise on paper. And then we'll debrief it. So how did you do in applying those principles that we talked about? What did that look like when you actually had to put it into practice? And then we'll talk about another topic. And we move through the week talking about power, how to choose issues and talk about issues in such a way that you can win and build your organizational power, the strategy chart, how to do meetings with decision makers, whether they're elected officials or corporate decision makers, and moving through how to build coalitions. That's another really big one. What are some principles for thinking about really being effective in a coalition?
And taking action as well.
And taking action, exactly.
So it's been 40 years.
It's been 40 years. I've only been around for about 13 of those. But yes, the Academy has been training people since 1973.
Well, I have to tell you that I have, both personally and professionally and also politically, on all three of those, just gained so much from the great work that you do. Having been personally trained a number of times through your coursework and through your 5-day training, I've seen the benefit of it. I've seen the growth from it. Just a couple of more questions, Judy. What is the biggest mistake an organizer can make?
Well, there are a lot of them, but the biggest one, I think, is probably sitting in your office being afraid to get out in the field because you might make a mistake. So get out there and try it out and learn from your mistakes. Think strategically. Another big mistake that people make that makes us want to cry is rushing into action and not taking the time to plan and develop strategy. We have people tell us, oh, but it was a crisis. We didn't have time for training or developing a strategy. We just had to respond. Well, if you're responding in a less than effective way, you're not, you would have been way better off to take the time and do some thinking strategically. The other thing is not thinking about building the organization. Action is great. Mobilizing large numbers of people is terrific. But at the end of the day, you want to capture all of those people as members of your organization in one way or another. You want to be constantly building power so that our organizations can get to scale. The things that we're up against, you started out asking me about Citizens United, the things that we are up against, the forces that we are up against as progressives today are huge. And we have to be thinking really seriously about how do we get our organizations and our power to scale. And in order to do that, we have to be strategic, methodical, and always thinking about building the organization on a permanent basis.
And building the organization through the actions that you take and the issues that you are attempting to have a victory over, correct?
Exactly. I tell people when they tell me they didn't have time to plan for what they were going to do in a crisis, they just had to rush into action. I know that they've also missed the opportunity to bring all the people who were part of that action into the organization and to develop their leadership through that action. A big premise of organizing is that people learn by doing. So the best time to be learning, to be recruiting new members, to be building new leaders is as you are in action. It's not something that happens separately.
Now, Judy, in preparation for the show, I didn't tell you the big secret. The big secret is I've got 4 or 5 rolls of butcher tape. So, butcher tape. Do we have a couple of hours that we can do some strategy charts together? You think?
I would love to. I always get a kick out of making strategy charts, and you learn something new every time you do one. Well,
I saw your training a couple of years ago when we all met together in Las Vegas, and you're one of the best, and I really appreciate the time you've given us today. I know your busy schedule. I know it's Easter Sunday, and so thank you for taking this time. Now, tell us. Now, there's folks that may be listening to this who may want to become involved and go to the Midwest Academy. Tell us how they can reach you and take your course or learn about the good work that you do.
Yes, the Midwest Academy is at midwestacademy.com. And there's a full listing of our training sessions. We have about 10 a year. 5 of them are this 5-day training in the skills of organizing. 2 or 3 times a year we have a training for supervisors of organizers, helping supervisors think methodically about developing the next generation of the movement. And then twice a year we have a more advanced training, which is entirely focused around developing strategy for issue campaigns. So MidwestAcademy.com, our training director can be reached at training@MidwestAcademy.com and would be happy to respond to any questions.
Well, thank you. Again, congratulations on your good work. And as our good friend Heather Booth would say, always organize. Thank you again, Judy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ernie.
Take care now.
Yep. Bye-bye.
This is Ernie Powell with Grassroots Corner. We'll be right back.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to the Grassroots Corner. This is Ernie Powell on our special Easter edition. Our second guest is from Sacramento, California, a very good friend and a very seasoned and skilled organizer who has been with the farm workers movement in California for a number of years. Welcome, Mark Grossman.
Hey, Ernie. Pleasure to be with you.
So happy to have you here. Let me just give our listeners, this is an amazing background. I mean, you've been on a number of campaigns, both Assembly and State Senate campaigns. You've worked on ballot measures for the farm workers and other groups. You were the press secretary for the United Farm Workers from 1975 to 1981. Actually, I believe you were a speechwriter for UFW President Cesar Chavez, and you're currently with the Cesar Chavez Foundation. Could you tell us a little bit about your work there?
the Chavez Foundation is the other arm of the farm worker movement, the first one being the United Farm Workers of America. It was also founded by Cesar, obviously under a different name, in the 1960s. The UFW, of course, addressed the crippling abuses and exploitation of farm workers at the workplace, but Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Gilbert Padilla, and the other founders of the movement understood that it would take more than a union to overcome the crippling dilemmas farm workers faced, especially in the community, because unlike a lot of other workers who were unionized and organized and made decent living, farm workers would go home from work to a whole other set of dilemmas: substandard housing, lack of educational opportunity, real discrimination based on race and ethnicity. So the Chavez Foundation is the nonprofit tax-exempt arm of the movement that helps farm workers and other low-income Latino families and seniors and others, too, with these crippling dilemmas they face in the community.
So it's a community-based organization in addition to the great work that is done in the field in organizing workers, farm workers, correct?
That's right. It deals on everything from affordable housing. There are 32 affordable housing communities for low and very low income working families and seniors, more than 4,400 units in 4 states, very amenity-intensive, quality market rate, quality rental units, and senior projects, and all of which have extensive social services from Si Se Puede learning centers where young kids get after-school and weekend activities and tutoring and math and English and computer skills, to active senior programs to keep seniors active and healthy, to a 9-station network of Spanish-language educational radio stations in 4 states with 500,000 daily listeners and a combination of popular regional Mexican music and state-of-the-art educational programming, to educational tutoring services after school in 4 states, helping needy kids in low-income school districts be able to read and do math at grade level by the time they're in high school, to our work with the National Chavez Center at our headquarters at La Paz in Keene, California, and that's to tell the story of Cesar and the farm workers to succeeding generations.
Which takes me to where I want to go next, Mark. All of the good work that's happening now comes within a historic context. I'd like you to share a little bit about, and I know you worked with Cesar for many years. Share with our listeners, please, the lessons and principles that Cesar worked from in the organizing work that he developed.
Well, it's funny. Next month in April is going to be 20 years since Cesar's passing, and if anything, his interest in him and his life and his values and his legacy is increasing. But I think we like to say that the greatest monument to Cesar Chavez is not on a street sign or an official holiday. There are now 8 states that celebrate his birthday. It's really in the courage to work for change that he inspired first among the farm workers, but then in millions and millions of people from all walks of life who never worked on a farm. Cesar was very uncomfortable being recognized and being honored when he was alive. He refused most personal awards. He almost never let anyone name anything for him. I think it was because he realized there were many Cesar Chavezes. There were countless men and women who made great sacrifices and accomplished tremendous things, but whose names were largely lost to history. Cesar used to like to say that his job as an organizer was helping ordinary people do extraordinary things. And I think that was partly a big part of the secret to his success.
So let me ask you to repeat that, because this show is about, as you know, the show is called Grassroots Corner. It's about organizing. So say that one more time about Cesar's emphasis on organizing.
Sure. Cesar used to say that his main job as an organizer, and that's how he saw himself, was helping ordinary people do the extraordinary things that we're all capable of doing. For 100 years before Cesar came along, a lot of people who had better educations and more resources than he had tried and failed organized farm workers. And I think one of the reasons he succeeded was that he got people to believe in themselves. He made everyone in the movement believe that the job they were doing was important. It didn't matter if you were an attorney representing the union in court or you were a striker cooking in the strike kitchen. He made you believe the job you were doing was vitally important. And he by doing so, he gave people faith in themselves. He gave people faith that they could take on and overcome one of California's richest industries,
right,
and do something that had never been done before.
Now, the grape boycott brought the giant agricultural industry in California to its knees. What were the main factors in that victory back in the '60s, and what lessons can help us today as we deal with so much income disparity, high rates of unemployment, threats to the safety net, etc.?
Well, the boycott for Cesar, as was the case with the major tenets of his movement, had both a practical and philosophical basis. So for the boycott, he learned about from studying Gandhi's salt boycott in India in 1930 and closely following Dr. King's career from the Montgomery bus boycott on. It was allowing masses of people to participate in their own cause. But practically, he knew from studying history that all the unions and all the strikes for 100 years in farm labor had been broken. And because the industry controlled the social, economic, political institutions in rural California. They controlled the courts and the police and the socio-economic institutions. So the genius of the boycott was that it took the battle from the fields, where the odds were stacked against farm workers, and it transferred the fight to the cities, where Cesar created a broad-based coalition from students and union members and clergy and faith-based people and minority groups and ordinary consumers. And by creating millions of people, by giving millions of people the opportunity to make a small sacrifice, because Cesar knew not everyone was going to do what we did, give up our lives and work full-time with the movement. But by giving everyone a chance to make a small sacrifice by not buying grapes or other boycotted products, they could still make an important contribution to help the poorest of the poor who were struggling nonviolently to make real progress for themselves. And millions of people responded.
You know, in preparing for this this interview, I put together a couple of clips that stood out to me as statements from Cesar about his organizing work, his vision, et cetera, et cetera. I want to play those clips and ask you to comment on them, if I could, please.
Sure.
You guys ready for it?
Humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot.
Hold on, we got some technical issues. It'll happen.
Change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who is. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. The UFW was the beginning. We attacked that historical source of shame and infamy that our people in this country lived with. We attacked that injustice not by complaining, not by seeking handouts, not by becoming soldiers in the war on poverty. We organized.
That I've heard those quotes more than once, and the last one about we organize, of course, is just it is a core theme of the way the movement was built. But could you give us a little context for these quotes and your own impression of them, Mark?
Sure. These quotes are from a landmark address that Cesar delivered that we worked on together in 1984 before the Commonwealth Club of California in San Francisco. And it was perhaps one of the few occasions when Cesar was really very introspective and put himself and his movement in an historical context. For many years, Cesar resisted being identified as a Latino leader. Part of it was political because there were other minorities in farm labor in the 60s and 70s, Filipino Americans, some African Americans. There were even some workers from South Yemen and Arab nations in the 70s and some other places. But as he traveled around the nation, and as his personal aide too, I would travel with in many places, countless people would come up to him and they would say, "You inspired me to go to college. You inspired me to get into the labor movement, to run for public office, to become a professional." Certainly Latinos, but also people from all walks of life who never worked on a farm. And Cesar came to realize that his work had gone beyond farm labor, that he was having an impact far beyond the fields. So that clip from his Commonwealth Club speaks to that question. That he said that once the union became established, it showed people that if the farm workers could do it in the fields, if they could overcome adversity and great odds and succeed with everything they had going against them, then it could happen in education, in the city councils, in the state legislatures, in the professions, in a whole slew of disciplines and occupations that have nothing to do with agriculture.
It's so interesting because in my own personal reflection, I'm thinking about, I was involved in the renters' rights movement in Santa Monica, which created a landmark renters' rights rent control law. And I'm thinking about the city council. The Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights finally had full power, if you will, in 1981. And I'm thinking about all 7 of those members that were sitting up on that dais, and 5 of them had been involved in the Great Boycott.
Yeah, and that's right. So many people trace their social and political consciousness and activism to Cesar Chavez.
Right.
There were thousands and thousands. You and I are among them who actually worked directly with the movement over the decades. And there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and then millions more who either volunteered for the boycotts in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, or they were inspired by it. President Obama has told us that he was inspired to go to Chicago and become a community organizer in 1985 because of Cesar Chavez.
Which leads
that began his public career.
Which leads me to my next question. For the first time in history, a U.S. president visited La Paz. Now, La Paz is the national headquarters for the farm workers movement, as you indicated earlier, in the Tehachapi Mountains in Keene, California. And in October of last year, President Obama was there to recognize the great work and the great legacy of the Union and the Chavez legacy. And I know that Dolores Huerta was there, who was for many years the vice president of the Union, as well as Mrs. Chavez, Helen Chavez, Cesar's wife, and a number of their adult children. Just tell us about that day, Mark. Were you there? Just tell us about it.
Yeah, I was. I was pretty busy. We had 150 reporters from all over the world there that day, along with 7,000 people. And you've been there. We used to call it the North Unit.
Right.
And if you can imagine 7,000 people there in this little mountain hamlet, I never thought I'd hear "Hail to the Chief" played at La Paz. But what happened was that the Cesar Chavez Foundation, which owns and operates La Paz, donated a small portion of the 187 acres to the federal government. And under the Antiquities Act, the president has the authority to declare and proclaim a national monument on land that's been donated to the federal government. So this is the 398th unit of the National Park Service. It's operated now as a partnership between the Cesar Chavez Foundation and the National Park Service, because the Park Service's mission is to tell the story of America. But as Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar said, of the 397 then units of the Park Service, none of them had anything to do with a contemporary Latino. And you can't tell the story of America without telling the story of the Latino-American experience in this country. And the new national monument, the Cesar E. Chavez National Monument, is going to be the beginning on the road to fulfilling that mission.
And of course, the president gave a speech that day, correct?
He did. It was very moving, and the president talked about how now La Paz is going to take its place among, some of the most important public places in America, from the Statue of Liberty to the Grand Canyon. La Paz is now in that tradition.
So let's go to the future, or let's go to both the present and the future. And I did watch a tape the other evening of your interview on CNN. I think it was CNN. It was one of those news shows in which you talked about the growth of the union and the kinds of issues the union is now involved in. Tell us the if you will, the state of play for the farm workers movement, both in California and nationally.
Sure. Yeah, Cesar said many times that if the movement did not survive his passing, then his work would have been in vain. And today, the farm worker movement is carrying on through the work of hundreds and hundreds of men and women who work hard every day to help the neediest among us. The UFW, the United Farm Workers of America, continues struggling every day to defend farm workers. The union has won new protections through recent UFW contracts with the largest strawberry grower and winery in America, with one of the biggest vegetable growers in California. 75% of the state's fresh mushroom industry is under union contract. So is one of the largest dairies in the nation, and the biggest winery in Washington State. Just since almost a year ago last spring, 2,000 more California tomato workers are now under UFW contracts. Some of those are elections the UFW won 23 years earlier. Thousands more workers in melons and vegetables and tree fruit and table grapes are negotiating union contracts in 2013. The UFW has also been leading the fight for immigration reform for more than a decade. Arturo Rodriguez, Cesar's successor as president of the UFW, has been in Washington, D.C. repeatedly in the last few months in continuous negotiations with some of the nation's largest grower associations, as well as lobbying top members of Congress over the agricultural provisions of the comprehensive immigration reform bill that is in the works. Last weekend, thousands upon thousands of farm workers took to the streets in Washington State, in California, in Santa Rosa, in Salinas, in Fresno, in Bakersfield, in Oxnard, in the Coachella Valley. They marched to celebrate Cesar's birthday, but also to create a new immigration process that will free so many of them from the vulnerability to abuse that comes because of their immigration status. In addition, in April, more than 150 farm workers are traveling to Washington, D.C. This is the largest contingent of agricultural workers ever to lobby lawmakers for immigration reform. This will be between April 7 and April 10, sponsored by the UFW, the UFW Foundation, and the Cesar Chavez Foundation.
How do people get involved? What do they do? What website do they go to?
The best way, the United Farm Workers has an excellent website, as does the Cesar Chavez Foundation. The UFW website is ufw.org, and you can sign up for the free listserv to get updated reports on a weekly basis, and to directly participate in UFW campaigns to get new contracts, to win immigration reform, to win pesticide protection improvements, and a whole slew of important issues that directly affect farm workers. The Cesar Chavez Foundation's website is chavezfoundation.org, and it has a wealth of information about all the community organizing activities in affordable housing, in educational radio, educational tutoring, and the National Chavez Center that you can also get information on at chavezfoundation.org. And, most importantly, I think, the best way to honor Cesar Chavez on his birthday, Easter Sunday this year.
That's right. That's today. Easter Sunday is his birthday.
That's right.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
Sure. The best way to honor Cesar is to do something. It's now an official holiday in a number of states. In California, state workers get it off. But this should be a day on, not a day off. Mm-hmm. And so, the best way to honor Cesar is to go out there and do something to be of service. Cesar used to say that, that true wealth is not measured in money or status or power. It's measured in the legacy we leave behind for those we love and those we inspire. So the way you honor Cesar is to get involved. To help the farm workers, of course, but to be involved in your community on behalf of the people who need help.
Well, Mark Grossman, I've known you for a lot of years, and I want to tell you that all through those years I've respected the work you've done, the writing you've done, the way in which you've worked very hard for this movement and this cause and for social justice. I want to thank you for this interview, and I want to encourage our friends and our listeners to be in touch with the farm workers movement. But Mark, great work, and once again, si se puede.
Si se puede.
Okay, my friend, thank you very much. You're listening to Ernie Powell with the Grassroots Corner.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
This is Ernie Powell from the Grassroots Corner. Welcome back. Our final guest today is a good friend of mine from Northern California, Sacramento. She's one of the best lobbyists I've ever seen, and she works on some really, really tough issues having to do with hunger and poverty as an advocate for the Western Center on Law and Poverty. So we're pleased to have with us today my good friend and a really stellar advocate, Jessica Bartholow. Jessica, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Ernie, for having me.
So pleased to have you. And once again, this is our Easter edition, so happy Easter to you and your family, of course. So let's start with the kind of work that you do. Tell us about the Western Center on Law and Poverty.
The Western Center on Law and Poverty is a statewide organization. We work with legal services throughout the state to represent low-income people and help to protect their rights to basic needs help, and including health, food, housing.
And just, with so much wealth and affluence in this country, why are so many Americans going to bed hungry?
Well, here in California and throughout the state, or throughout the nation, we've been seeing more people who have no jobs or are going with very small wages. Right, poverty has increased tremendously over the last couple of years, and poverty is the number one reason that we have hunger, obviously, and joblessness is a big contributor to that. In California, we still have joblessness rates at about 10%, just under 10%, and even though we are getting some jobs back, those jobs are low paying, and we've, during the recession, cut assistance to low-wage households, removed slots for child care, for example, removed assistance for low-income families who are working and have low wages through our TANF program, our Temporary Aid to Needy Families program. So both because of the recession, but also because of the austerity measures here in California and throughout the state, we are seeing increased hardship. And what that means for people is that kids are going to bed hungry, parents are having to make hard choices, and many more people are going without housing and other basic needs.
So what is the work that you do day to day in Sacramento? What do you fight for? What are the issues you're taking on? Tell us about your day-to-day work.
Well, I'd love to tell you about what we're doing today. A lot of people think about jobs being Monday through Friday, but as you know, Ernie, when you're doing this work, it's not just a job. It is a life commitment to justice, and for me, it's a commitment to reducing poverty and the impact of poverty. So today, I'm here meeting with a number of advocates who are putting our heads together about the Homeless Bill of Rights. It's a bill that we have here in California. There are about 5 other states that are seeking to implement or consider a Bill of Rights that would protect people who have no homes from being criminalized for not having a home. Just a couple of months ago, a gentleman in San Francisco faced 2 years in prison being arrested because he was sitting on the sidewalk. We see
sitting on the sidewalk.
Yeah, go ahead. Sitting on the sidewalk. That's right. We see a lot of municipalities. They're struggling with what to do with increased homelessness and housing and lack of housing, and as a result, unfortunately, the response that some municipalities have is to implement policies against sitting or sleeping or lying on the sidewalk, when really what we know that the answer to homelessness is to create housing and affordable housing.
Well, so I know you're involved in another interesting policy project. I believe it's called the Contract for a Prosperous America. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Plan for a Broad Prosperity. That's right. So here in California and throughout the nation, people who've been working on anti-poverty measures have been struggling for a couple of years with the austerity measures in states and across the country and in D.C. It's been really frustrating over time to mobilize and continue the energy around a message that says don't cut. A number of organizations, ourselves, and across the spectrum, have gotten behind a vision that we need to be more fair in how we establish our budget. Our budget is a value statement, and we've been able to get behind a vision for being balanced. But we want to be able to have more than that. We want to be able to say, look, don't cut, and here are the ways that we can actually grow a broad prosperity for all Americans. So we've reached out to allies across the country and in D.C. to help us frame out what that would be. And they're things that all Americans can get behind, right? We want to be able to make sure that somebody who's working makes enough money so that their kids don't have to go hungry that night. We want to make sure that when families are at work, that their children are safe in child care settings, in their communities where that they can afford. Right now, according to the Food Research and Action Center, low-income working families are paying more for child care than they can pay for their monthly food bill, and therefore they're going hungry. We want to establish the right for all workers to have paid sick leave, and to be able to leave work to take care of themselves or their family members when there's an illness.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what are the various groups and coalition partners that are engaged in this effort?
Well, right now we're reaching out to, like I said, about 30 kind of organizations to help us think through what are the first asks that we're going to make, the first kind of level setting that we all agree are things that we need to have to make sure we're leaning towards a broad prosperity for everyone. So I can't name names yet, but there are a number of organizations that are kind of editing and talking and coalescing around what this would mean to have a plan that we could all agree on across issue area. I think right now you do see many organizations kind of saying, well, we're housing advocates, but we're also child care advocates, because we know that families are kind of caught in between, and they're working across issue areas. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is to create and strengthen dialogue across issue areas so that we're talking about people, not programs. And I think that if people across the country can engage in this dialogue to talk about people and what we all desire for ourselves and our family and our country, we can get behind something that many people believe in. And that's the goal.
So let me shift the discussion just a little bit, because, as you know, the show is sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and our concerns have to do with all Americans, but especially with older Americans, because that's our membership. Tell us about poverty and hunger for older Americans. Is it getting worse?
Well, I mean, you certainly see an increase in the numbers of older Americans, right? And because of that, because of the recession and the amount that people have had to pull out of their pockets and their savings to make ends meet over the last couple of years, I think if we're not seeing the increase in hunger and poverty yet. We will soon. In California, among those who were most likely to be unemployed for long periods of time following the recession, they were people who were just entering their late 50s. So those households are least likely to be able to get that call back for employment as the economy gets back on its feet, and they're most likely to have spent down their resources, their reserves, and look forward to, unfortunately, a very difficult very difficult years as seniors. Here in California, we have about as many as 320,000 seniors who are receiving food stamps or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, for example.
So how do people get involved in your work? How do they find out what you're doing? How do they help?
Right. So our website is wclp.org. That's Western Center on Law and Poverty.org. And they can go there to see the kinds of legislation that we're working on and learn about legislation in Sacramento and some of our asks for the D.C. legislators. There are a number of organizations that we work with across the country as well, including yours, but also the Food Research and Action Center and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And on our homeless advocacy work, we're working with the Western Regional Advocacy Project. RAP Home is their website, .org.
Say that again. Say that again, please.
Sure. Western Regional Advocacy Project.
Okay.
RAP, W-R-A-P,
right.
Home.org. And people can learn about the Homeless Bill of Rights there. And it's happening, like as I said, here in California, also in Oregon, and a couple other states.
So the Homeless Bill of Rights and a number of other good things that you're doing in your day-to-day lobbying and also your public advocacy work in California. I appreciate the time you spent with me. I know how busy you are, and I want to wish you the best and just say that I know how committed you are to your work, and thank you for the contributions you make to our collective efforts to make this a more humane society, Jessica.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you for your work as well. And happy Easter and happy Cesar Chavez birthday.
Exactly. Back to you. Happy Easter, my friend, and happy Cesar Chavez birthday. This is the Grassroots Corner. This is Ernie Powell. Welcome back to the Grassroots Corner. Just a couple of remarks. This has been a really important show. We've had three kind of themes. Number one, organizing with the Midwest Academy and Judy Hertz. We learned a lot about how the Midwest Academy teaches people to organize. I would encourage anyone listening to this show to contact them and take their training course, because it's very important to understand the techniques, the strategies, how to plan tactics, how to get it all done. And so I'm very appreciative of Judy spending some time with us today and having the opportunity to talk about the Midwest Academy. Second was our interview with Mark Grossman, who's with the Cesar Chavez Foundation, a long and important legacy of turning the harvest of shame to the harvest of justice. He talked a lot about the Cesar Chavez legacy, about the way in which the farm workers fought the great fight on the grape boycott, the lettuce boycott, and their current gains with strawberry workers and a number of other workers, both in California, Washington, and a number of other states around the country. So if you can, please go to the UFW and Farm Worker Foundation websites, Cesar Chavez Foundation websites, and spend some time volunteering or contributing if you can. And finally, we had a very good conversation with Jessica Bartholow from the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Poverty is real in this country. Poverty is growing, particularly for older Americans. So she talked a lot about the safety net and the various programs that she's instituting, both as a lobbyist as an organizer. My own concluding remarks are that this show is about organizing. It's about fighting for social justice and social change. I'm the Grassroots Director for the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We're working full-time on behalf of our members and on behalf of on behalf of all Americans to fight for Social Security and Medicare. I'd hope that you'd go to our website at www.ncpssm.org, www.ncpssm.org, and join us and volunteer with us, and because there's a number of important issues. We got to stop the chain CPI. We have to stop these cuts to Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid, and otherwise support these programs that have done so much to keep Americans as they age out of poverty and a retirement with dignity and economic and health security. This is the Grassroots Corner. Thank you for joining us today, and happy Easter.